The next thing that we have to study is Boher effect. Now, what is this Boher effect? You know that the binding of oxygen with the blood, or we say hemoglobin, basically the part of blood, that is the binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is according to different categories of the conditions which are present. If not categories is the right word, I would say that various persistent conditions which are present in the blood at different sites, like at alveoli, like at the tissue level. So, the site of tissue where the exchange has to take place. Now, this Boher effect is nothing but it is the study of oxygen saturation, that is saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. You know that 97% is being transported, oxygen of course is being transported in the form of oxyhemoglobin. There is a certain stage that tells us that now the hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. That means no more oxygen would be binding with the hemoglobin. That is the maximum amount, of oxygen that can be taken by the blood. So, that is oxygen saturation. We have discussed about it. Now, what is basically Boher effect? See, there are a few points, you have to understand them and you have to learn them. So, that is why I will see one by one what each point is. Increased carbon dioxide levels, they lower the pH of blood. That is so certain, because carbon dioxide is acidic, so the pH of the blood would be reduced. This affects the ability of hemoglobin subunits to transport oxygen. Another thing, when the carbon dioxide concentration increases, there is a pH decline. The pH decline does not allow complete binding of oxygen with the hemoglobin. That is what they have mentioned, that a lower pH causes hemoglobin to release more oxygen. A higher pH causes the hemoglobin to hold on to more oxygen. This is what has been mentioned. Now, you see, when we have higher concentration of carbon dioxide, you have to remember one thing, that our blood, that is our hemoglobin, it has more affinity towards carbon dioxide as compared to oxygen. As the affinity is greater, but the blood that is being, the amount of oxygen that is being carried, that is as much as 97%. While on the contrary, we have carbon dioxide that is lesser than or almost equivalent to 70%. So, what we have is that there is a condition of oxygen saturation, okay, and that is when the CO2 is higher, that is CO2 concentration is higher, we see a shift in this particular graph. Now, what is this graph? This graph is the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen, and you can see the x-axis represents the partial pressure of oxygen. I have explained this, we have understood this earlier as well. Now, over here it is quite clear that at a higher partial pressure, this much saturation is coming. That means the oxygen content has to be more, then only that much saturation would come. That means, which points this particular understanding of the situation is pointing towards the situation that the oxygen has to be more, the oxygen content has to be more, the partial pressure has to be more, so that much saturation comes. That means supposedly you are having 5 grams of blood, just giving you an example, don't compare it with the actual values. Supposedly you are having 5 grams of blood, you have 12 grams of oxygen. Now, that 5 grams of blood can carry 12 grams of oxygen in appropriate conditions. That means the partial pressure, or don't take grams, take partial pressure of oxygen. Partial pressure is 50. So, at 50 partial pressure, the 5 grams of blood carry 10 milliliter of oxygen. On the contrary, if we have carbon dioxide concentration which is higher and the pH is lower, what would happen? That 5 grams of blood at the partial pressure 70, that means more of oxygen should be present in the given air, would carry 10 milliliter of blood, which means that the air that you are inhaling should have more oxygen. The partial pressure should be greater, the oxygen content in the given air should be greater, then only the saturation would be brought about. So, Boher effect is the shifting of the curve towards the right when the concentration of CO2 is more. That means the partial pressure at which saturation had to take place, it increases. This is what Boher effect is all about. You can have a look at these points once again and then we will move forward, that what Boher effect tells us. I am going to repeat it, that when the carbon dioxide level increases, the pH of the blood decreases, because carbon dioxide is acidic. When the pH of blood decreases, the hemoglobin's ability ability to bind with oxygen also declines. That means the lower pH causes hemoglobin to release more oxygen. That means the saturation now has shifted to a greater value of partial pressure. This is all we have to understand in Boher effect. Next, what we have, there is a cumulative representation of Boher effect. It represents the effect of PCO2 and acidity, that is hydrogen ion concentration, on the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Now try to associate it with at tissues and at lungs, where the shift would be. Increased at tissues, we have increased PCO2, that means partial pressure of CO2 is more. Moreover, there is increased H ion concentration. Going back, see this. At the site of tissues, there is more concentration of protons, as you can see over here. Okay? No, I am sorry, we are talking at this site. There is more concentration of CO2, there is more concentration of hydrogen ions. So what would happen? There would be shift of oxygen hemoglobin curve to the right. I am sorry, I have misplaced something. See this, at tissues and at lungs we are considering. At tissues, there is increased concentration of partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and there is increased H positive concentration, proton concentration is more. Now we would go back and then we will see what would happen. Over here it has been mentioned that there would be shift of O2 HP curve towards the right. That means we are going to see the Boher effect at the tissues. Now let us see how it is possible, how if we analyze this particular thing. We have to talk about this particular site at the tissues, and we have to see the Boher effect taking place. Now you see, they said that there was an increased concentration of CO2. Yes, there is increased concentration of CO2. CO2 has almost increased. Then we have, when this CO2 is increased, there would be rise in pH because it is acidic. Secondly, what we have is that there is raised concentration of protons as well. So this protons and carbon dioxide presence would be responsible for shifting of O2 HB curve towards right, that is the Boher effect. Coming back, we are going to see what happens at lungs. At lungs, there is decreased partial pressure of carbon dioxide because over there partial pressure of oxygen, the difference is higher, and H positive concentration is also lower. As a result, there is shift of O2 HP curve towards the left. That is why it is possible for oxygen to bind more with hemoglobin. Now you see over here that this declines because it is being converted into bicarbonate. First of all, that means H positive ion concentration is decreasing. Next, this carbon dioxide is moving out. So the carbon dioxide is also decreasing. The partial pressure of carbon dioxide inside the blood is also decreasing. It is less, quite comparatively it would decrease, or if we talk about this area, here also it is less. So it is quite easy for oxygen to bind with hemoglobin, and the shift would be towards left. That would be reverse Boher effect, that is known as Haldane effect. Okay, so Boher effect facilitates the O2 release from HB at tissues. Yes, it does, because the shifting is towards the right, and it is responsible for O2 uptake by HB at lungs because the shift is towards left. Now this particular thing, when we study, it is studied in the terms of Haldane effect. This shifting towards the right is shifting towards the right is known as Boher effect, while reverse Boher effect, that is shifting towards the right, that is left. Shifting towards the left is known as Haldane effect. So it is as it says that it is related to Boher shift is the Haldane effect, which is phenomena in which oxygenated blood has a reduced capacity for hemoglobin to carry carbon dioxide, because some form of carbon dioxide is released in the form of carb amino hemoglobin as well. So when we talk about this particular thing, we are seeing that Haldane effect says that oxygen displaces CO2 from these hemoglobin, and that happens in the condition when the pH is high. pH is high, that means lower concentration of carbon dioxide. When the temperature is low, now where is temperature low? Temperature is low towards alveoli, okay, towards the site of exchange, that is alveoli, and this is all we have to study about the Haldane effect, the Boher effect, and this one thing you have to remember, that while Boher effect is for the oxygen dissociation curve, the Haldane effect is for the association of carbon dioxide with hemoglobin, because almost 23% is transported in the form of carbaminohemoglobin. So the availability of oxygen, the higher concentration of oxygen, I would say higher partial pressure of oxygen, the lower pH, that is the higher pH, that is more positive pH, basic pH, that would not enable the binding of carbon dioxide with the hemoglobin, and that would be known as Haldane effect. So this is all about the transport of gases and understanding various associations and dissociations from the point of view of Boher and Haldane effect. Also we got introduced to a term known as chloride shift, and this is all we have in our ambit that we have to study about the